What would you do if the government changed your family's race? Not during your lifetime, but 22 years after you died. That's exactly what happened in Louisiana in 1910. Two teenage sisters were thrown off a train, not because of what they did, but because who the law decided their great-grandfather actually had been. If Abraham was black, they said, his descendants are black. Because in America's racial history, the most powerful tool is not violence. It's documentation. If you can go to bed white one night and wake up black in the morning, then none of this means anything. Abraham Honor Baham died in 1888, buried in Noah Cemetery. He thought his story ended there. At least we thought his story ended there. But 22 years later, the law dug him up. Not from the ground, but from the records. And what it found changed his family's future forever. Hi, I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being here with me on my channel where we talk about American identity and family stories. And you are watching the very first episode of your story. I opened up a forum a couple weeks ago to invite you to share your mystery ancestor stories, and I got so many of them, hundreds, and actually I'm trying to cover all of them. That's my plan. But it takes a while, so I have the first one here, and I'm excited to bring you the rest of the stories. If you would like to connect with me off YouTube, please jump over to Patreon at patreon.com/NYTN. You two, get up. The conductor said, "This section isn't for you." His great-granddaughters were just teenagers when the world told them they weren't who they thought they were. The year was 1910, and Edith and Belle Lee were on a train heading home, sitting in the white-only section like they always had. Then a conductor stopped them. The girls were really confused. They weren't trying to break any rules, and they were white. At least that's what they had always been told. Their father, Sam Lee, had raised them in a white family, in a white home with a white future, and no one had ever questioned it. But that day, the train conductor did. He ordered them to move to the black section, and when they refused, he threw them off the train. Humiliated and stranded miles from home, the girls ran back home to their father, demanding answers. Sam Lee was furious because he knew what this meant. It wasn't about two girls on a train. This was about the future of these girls. He marched into court, and he decided to sue the railroad for $15,000 in damages, which at the time was a lot more, claiming his daughters had been wrongfully classified. But this story is not just about two girls. It was actually about their great-grandfather, a man who had been dead for over 20 years. The court had to decide if the daughters were truly white. When Sam Lee took the railroad company to court, he actually thought it would be simple. His daughters were white. They had all been white. But the railroad company wasn't backing down. They had evidence. Inside the courtroom, the argument was not just about the girls Edith and Belle. It was about their great-grandfather, who they had never met. The solution of the question of color depended on the status of Abraham Baham. Whether he was of Indian or African descent is a contested issue of fact, and that is from the court itself. Their father, Sam Lee, sat in stunned silence as the lawyers argued over a man who had died decades before. If Abraham was black, they said, his descendants are black. And if his descendants were black, Sam Lee's daughters had no right to sit in the white section of the train. Sam couldn't believe what he was hearing. The plaintiff's cause of action, the court said, is based on the allegation that his two daughters are white children born of white parents. But in the eyes of the law, his daughters' identities could change overnight. And I think, again, this goes to show just how foolhardy it is to put so much stock in these color designations. If you can go to bed white one night and wake up black in the morning, then none of this means anything, in my opinion. But the court needed proof about their great-grandfather, Abraham. So to understand the case, we have to go to 1819 in Louisiana. This was the year their great-grandfather Abraham was born. At that time, race wasn't just about appearance. This was a legal status. Abraham was officially recorded as colored, and in parentheses, black, in the Freedmen's Bureau record from 1868. But 12 years later, in the 1880 census, he was labeled as mulatto. Now, Abraham's own identity wasn't fixed. You could say it shifted depending on who was documenting him and what they thought they saw. One year he's black, another he's mulatto. And then in 1910, we're revisiting his race again. If the court ruled that Abraham had been black, then his great-granddaughters would legally be black. But there was one more piece of Abraham's past that the court didn't expect. I found something unexpected. A man named Abraham Barnes, which it looks like it was likely the same man, just with his name misspelled, was listed as a Confederate prisoner at Fort McHenry in Maryland. He had been captured trying to flee south. He had refused to take the oath of allegiance. So what did this mean? Had Abraham fought for the Confederacy, had he passed as white to join, or was he forced to fight? If Abraham lived as white during the Civil War, that could change everything. Or maybe the court would erase that part of his history too. Was he living as a white man during the war? No one could say for sure. But one thing was clear, Abraham had lived in the shadows of Louisiana's racial system. And now, decades later, that system was reaching back into the past to define his descendants. On the question of race, the court said, there is no legal presumption either way. It must be determined by evidence of blood, reputation, and social privileges. Sam Lee had fought for his daughter's whiteness. The railroad company had fought to prove they were black, and the court had made his choice. Edith and Belle Lee were legally black. They could no longer claim to be white. They could no longer pass as white. They were who the law said they were. And the man responsible for this ruling, their great-grandfather, he's not even alive. He never even got a chance to speak. He had never even met these girls. He never spoke in the courtroom. He had never even answered a single question. But he lost the trial anyway. And this is what the court said, quote, the issue was one purely of fact, to be determined not only by evidence of the admixture of Negro blood, but by the evidence of reputation, of social reception, and the exercise of the privileges of a white man. And you can see there's this pattern here of many stories like this where families are reclassified as different things against their will, against their experience. The government was the one who decided who got to be white and who didn't. And there were real ramifications for that change. We're still living in a world where the powers that be want to and try to control identity and create something very binary. And I think if the law could change Abraham's family's race after his death, what does that say about our identity? What does that say about our family story? In 1910, this was not an unusual case. There were many like this where people were reclassified against their will. Entire families were made invisible in different ways, legally erased based on a rumor, a neighbor's testimony, or a change in who held power. It wasn't biology, it wasn't ancestry. There was control. Because if the law could reach 22 years into the grave to change a family's identity, if the law can reclassify a dead man and his family, then who's really in control of our identity? Because in America's racial history, the most powerful tool is not violence. It's documentation. And once it was written down, it became the truth. And I'm so excited to bring this family mystery to you, this family story. And if you submitted your stuff, stay tuned because I am still working through them all. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel. And if you'd like to join me on Patreon and do some behind the scenes stuff with me, it is patreon.com/NYTN. Otherwise, we'll talk soon. Over the last 2 years, I've been telling the stories that often get ignored. But lately, I've been facing an uphill battle behind the scenes of each video. My videos are getting flagged by YouTube when all I'm doing is sharing real history. If these stories have ever resonated with you or given you a new perspective, grab some Be a Good Ancestor merch and help me keep this channel going. Check out nytonashville.com.